him, nor would she make any entreaty. It might be that, after all, he had the courage to come and tell her in a manly, straightforward way that the thing must be all over, that he had made a mistake and would beg her pardon. If it were so, there should be no word of reproach. She would be quite quiet with him, but there should be no word of reproach. But if, in that other case, she could not be sure of her behaviour, but she knew well that he would not have to ask long for forgiveness. As for her dress, he had chosen to love her in that frock before, and she did not think that he would pay much attention to her dress on the present occasion. She opened the door very quietly and very slowly, intending to approach him in the same way. But in a moment, before she could remember that she was in the room, he had seized her in his arms, and was showering kisses upon her forehead, her eyes, and her lips. When she thought of it afterwards, she could not call to mind a single word that he had spoken before he held her in his embrace. It was she, surely, who had spoken first, when she begged to be released from his pressure. But she well remembered the first words that struck her ear. "Dearest Lucy, will you forgive me?" She could only answer them, through her tears, by taking up his hand and kissing it. When Lady Fawn came back with the carriage, she herself saw the figures of two persons walking very close together in the shrubberies. "Is that Lucy?" she asked. "Yes," said Augusta, with a tone of horror. "Indeed it is, and Mr. Greystock." Lady Fawn was neither shocked nor displeased, nor was she disappointed, but a certain faint feeling of being ill-used by circumstances came over her. "Dear me, the very first day!" she said. "It's because he wouldn't go to Lady Linlithgow's," said Amelia. "He's only waited, mamma." "But the very first day!" exclaimed Lady Fawn. "I hope Lucy will be happy, that's all." There was a great meeting of all the Fawns as soon as Lady Fawn and the eldest girls were in the house. Mr. Greystock had been walking about the grounds with Lucy for the last hour and a half. Lucy had come in once to beg that Lady Fawn might be told directly she came in. "She said you were to send for her, mamma," said Lydia. "But it's dinner time, my dear. What are we to do with Mr. Greystock?" "Ask him to lunch, of course," said Amelia. "I suppose it's all right," said Lady Fawn. "I'm quite sure it's all right," said Nina. "What did she say to you, Lydia?" asked the mother. "She was as happy as ever she could be," said Lydia. "There's no doubt about its all being all right, mamma. She looked just as she did when she got the letter before." "I hope she managed to change her frock," said Augusta. "She didn't, then," said Cecilia. "I don't suppose he cares one halfpenny about her frock," said Nina. "I should never think about a man's coat if I was in love." "Nina, you shouldn't talk that way," said Augusta. Whereupon Nina made a face behind one of her sisters' backs. Poor Augusta was never allowed to be a prophetess among them. The consultation was ended by a decision in accordance with which Nina went as an ambassador to the lovers. Lady Fawn sent her compliments to Mr. Greystock, and hoped he would come to lunch. Lucy must come to dinner because dinner was ready. "And mamma wants to see you for just a minute," added Nina, in a pretended whisper. "Oh, Nina, you darling girl," said Lucy, kissing her friend in an ecstasy of joy. "It's all right?" asked Nina, in a whisper which was really intended for privacy. Lucy did not answer the question otherwise than by another kiss. Frank Greystock was of course obliged to take his seat at the table, and was entertained with a profusion of civility. Everybody knew that he had behaved badly to Lucy, everybody except Lucy herself, who from this time forward altogether forgot that she had for some time looked upon him as a traitor, and had made up her mind that she had been deceived and ill-used. All the Fawns had spoken of him in Lucy's absence in the hardest terms of reproach, and declared that he was not fit to be spoken to by any decent person. Lady Fawn had known from the first that such a one as he was not to be trusted. Augusta had never liked him. Amelia had feared that poor Lucy Morris had been unwise and too ambitious. Georgina had seen that, of course, it would never do. Diana had sworn that it was a great shame. Lydia was sure that Lucy was a great deal too good for him. Cecilia had wondered where he would go to, a form of anathema which had brought down a rebuke from her mother. And Nina had always hated him like poison. But now nothing was too good for him. An unmarried man who is willing to sacrifice himself is, in feminine eyes, always worthy of ribbons and the chaplet. Among all these Fawns there was as little selfishness as can be found, even among women. The lover was not the lover of one of themselves, but of their governess. And yet, though he desired neither to eat nor drink at that hour, something special had been cooked for him, and a special bottle of wine had been brought out of the cellar. All his sins were forgiven him. No single question was asked as to his gross misconduct during the last 6 months. No pledge or guarantee was demanded for the future. There was, in the guise of a declared lover, and the fatted calf was killed. After this early dinner it was necessary that he should return to town, and Lucy obtained leave to walk with him to the station. To her thinking now there was no sin to be forgiven. Everything was and had been just as it ought to be. Had any human being hinted that he had sinned, she would have defended him to the death. Something was said between them about Lizzie, but nothing then arose from jealousy. Not till many months had passed did she tell him of Lizzie's message to herself and of her visit to Hertford Street. But they spoke of the necklace, and poor Lucy shuddered as she was told the truth about those false oaths. "I really do not think that, after that, Lord Fawn is right," she said, looking round at her lover. "Yes, but what he did before that," said Frank. "But are they not good and kind?" she said, pleading for her friends. "Was ever anybody so well treated as they have treated me? I'll tell you what, sir, you mustn't quarrel with Lord Fawn any more. I won't allow it." Then she walked back from the station alone, almost bewildered by her own happiness. That evening something like an explanation was demanded by Lady Fawn, but no explanation was forthcoming. When questions were asked about his silence, Lucy, half in a joke and half in earnest, fired up and declared that everything had been as natural as possible. He could not have come to Lady Linlithgow's house. Lady Linlithgow would not receive him. No doubt she had been impatient, but then that had not been her fault. Had he not come to her on the very first day after her return to Richmond? When Augusta said that something as to letters which might have been written, Lucy snubbed her. "Who says he didn't write? He did write. If I am contented, why should you complain?" "Oh, I don't complain," said Augusta. Then questions were asked as to her future, questions to which Lady Fawn had a right to demand an answer. What did Mr. Greystock propose to do now? Then Lucy broke down, sobbing, crying, triumphing with mingled love and happiness. She was to go to the deanery. Frank had brought with him a little note to her from his mother, in which she was invited to make the deanery at Bobsborough her home for the present. "And you are to go away just when you've come?" asked Nina. "Stay with us for a month, my dear," said Lady Fawn, "just to let people know that we are friends. And after that the deanery will be the best home for you." And so it was arranged. It need only be further said, in completing the history of Lucy Morris, as far as it can be completed in these pages, that she did go to the deanery, and that there she was received with all the affection which Mrs. Greystock could show to an adopted daughter. Her quarrel had never been with Lucy personally, but with the untoward fact that her son would not marry money. At the deanery she remained for 15 happy months, and then became Mrs. Greystock, with a bevy of Fawn bridesmaids around her. As the personages of a chronicle such as this should all be made to operate backwards and forwards on each other from the beginning to the end, it would have been desirable that the chronicler should have been able to report that the ceremony was celebrated by Mr. Emilius. But as the wedding did not take place till the end of summer, and as Mr. Emilius at that time never remained in town after the season was over, this was impossible. It was the Dean of Bobsborough, assisted by one of the minor canons, who performed the service. End of chapter 77.